Welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Audrey Lichter, the Executive Director of Chai Mitzvah, the Resource Center for Jewish Engagement. Today's Scholar Circle topic is Accusations of Genocide, Assessing Israel's Right to Self-Defense, featuring Dr. Norman Goda. This lecture has attracted our largest single lecture engagements to date with over 400 registrations. Chai Mitzvah is a national organization now celebrating its 17th year. We are the sponsor of Scholar Circle and a Jewish resource center that focuses on building community through Jewish engagement programs. We have over 20 curricula tailored for small group conversation, for teens and adults, lay or professionally led. For more information, please visit our website at chaimitzvah.org. The Scholar Circle program was inspired by Scott Shea, our founder and board president, who authored the best-selling book Conspiracy U, A Case Study, which unpacks anti-Zionism conspiracy theories from the left and the right of the political spectrum. The curriculum was taught in a recorded series by Dr. Andrew Pessin. The Scholar Circle program hosts lectures by prominent scholars every 2 weeks on topics relating to Israel and the Jewish community, geared towards rabbis, educators, and lay leaders who are charged with explaining the complex issues the Jewish community is facing. To that end, each lecture will have a resource guide that will be sent to you after the lecture. A recording of each lecture will be accessible on our website and shared through email. We are excited to continue the Scholar Circle program and need your support to keep it thriving. Scholar Circle has engaged nearly 4,000 participants since 10/7. Your donation will help us to continue bringing international scholars to you at no charge and share their expertise on the evolving Jewish world in the aftermath of October 7th. Thank you to all of you who have already contributed. To make a donation, please visit chaimitzvah.org and visit our gold medal tab, Scholar Circle, and select Support Scholar Circle. This will also be included in our follow-up email. The program's recording will be sent to your email in a few days and is also available on our website at chaimitzvah.org. Dr. Norman J.W. Goda is the Norman and Erman Brahman Professor of Holocaust Studies at the University of Florida. He specializes in the history of the Holocaust, war crimes, trials, 20th century diplomacy. He is the author and co-author or editor of 10 books, including Tales from Spandau, Nazi Criminals and the Cold War, The Holocaust, Europe, the World and the Jews, U.S. Intelligence and the Nazis, and Rethinking Holocaust Justice, Essays Across Disciplines, as well as 2 books on early history of Israel. Since October 7th, he has worked on the history and augmentation of genocide accusations made against Israel. We welcome audience questions at any time, and please use the Zoom Q&A box to submit. Dr. Goda, welcome to Scholar Circle.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and I'd like to thank especially Audrey Lichter and Simon Lichter for having me. I thought, in accordance with my instructions, I would talk for about a half an hour, and that will leave time for questions. But first, I need to share my screen, which might be a challenge. And so let's do that. And we will play from the start. Can everyone see that? Audrey, can you see that?
Yeah.
You can see the screen.
Mm-hmm. Great. Perfect.
Okay. So my talk this evening concerns the widespread accusation after October 2023 that Israel has pursued genocide in the Gaza Strip. We should see this accusation as a globally wielded rhetorical weapon of war aimed at the delegitimization and even the end of the Jewish state. Genocide is the crime of crimes as we know. It denotes the deliberate killing of a people in whole or in part based on ethnicity, race, nationality, or religion. A genocidal state is anathema, as are those who support it. The Columbia anthropologist Mahmoud Mamdani, yes, the father of New York's mayor-elect, wrote 15 years ago that genocide is, and I quote, a label to be stuck on your worst enemy, a perverse version of the Nobel Prize, part of the rhetorical arsenal that helps vilify your adversaries. I'll discuss the accusation from three perspectives. First, the historical, then what I would call the contemporary ideological, and finally, the perspective of phony or fake or faux expertise. So let's start with the historical. Okay, trying to get to the next slide. Okay, good. Those of you, or those of us of a certain age, will remember the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, under Yasser Arafat. The PLO emerged after the Arab defeat in the 1967 Six-Day War. It rejected a compromise peace in lieu of Israel's destruction. The PLO styled itself a national liberation movement, resisting colonialism while arguing in its charter that Israel was illegitimate, colonialist, racist, and of course fascist. The PLO, however, was also a conglomeration of terror groups attacking civilian targets, school buses, passenger aircraft, even the Israeli Olympic team. They caused fear, but they also caused outrage, and they could not destroy Israel. Worse, the Israelis retaliated against PLO bases, mostly in Lebanon. The PLO thus had to undermine Israel's right to exist and its right to self-defense. The PLO had allies, particularly the states of what was called the Non-Aligned Movement, or the NAM. The non-aligned movement included Middle Eastern, African, Latin American, and Asian states, most of whom had recently been liberated from colonial control after World War II. They supported what they called revolutionary violence to overthrow colonialism. And in the 1970s, they fought colonial remnants, chief among them South African apartheid, and they said the existence of Israel. The non-aligned movement was friendly with the communist world as well, and with radical leftist movements in the West. And by 1974, the states of the non-aligned movement, together with the communist states, had a majority in the UN General Assembly. In 1974, okay, why can't I advance? Advance this way. In 1974, the PLO was invited against all established procedure to sit in the General Assembly. The genocide charge became central in this session. The PLO aimed to show that A, what the West called terror was actually legitimate resistance, because B, Israel aimed not to live in peace, but to destroy the Palestinians as a group. The Arab states joined in. The PLO was popular in their countries. Many sub-Saharan African states joined in too. In part, Arafat looked the part of the revolutionary, and in part, the Arab states backed them, that is, the sub-Saharan African states, in fighting apartheid. In his infamous General Assembly speech of November 1974, Arafat proclaimed that the Zionists, and I quote, see in the Palestinian child, in the Palestinian tree, an enemy that should be exterminated, unquote. Martyrs lost in resistance operations, he said, were, quote, offered in sacrifice, all in an effort to resist the imminent threat of liquidation. PLO political chief Farouk al-Kaddoumi invoked similar inversion. The combat was forced upon us, he said, because despite PLO appeals for coexistence, and I quote, we have been met with death and extermination. He continued, we shall not lay down our rifles of revolution. We shall use them to reject death and destruction of our people who have been exposed to the danger of extermination. Others in that session took up this rhetoric. Mauritania, attributed to Theodor Herzl and contemporary Israelis, and I quote, a demented will to exterminate an entire people. Rashid Driss of Tunisia, a former ambassador to the US, argued that the Palestinians, and I quote, have had no choice but to defend themselves against a vast enterprise designed to liquidate them as a nation, as individuals, unquote. Abdurrahman Haji Hussein of Somalia, a former prime minister, said that the Palestinian choices were, quote, armed struggle or oblivion. Cuba said that Zionism was, quote, an unparalleled form of aggression verging on genocide because it aimed to annihilate the Palestinian nation, to wipe it off the map and erase it from history. Genocide accusations exploded in the General Assembly with the 1982 Lebanon War. The achievable Israeli aim in 1982 was the destruction of PLO military infrastructure in southern Lebanon. The less achievable aim was regime change in Beirut and expulsion of the Syrians from the Bekaa Valley. The fighting was tougher than expected. The Israelis deployed artillery, air power, and a siege of Beirut from late June to mid-August, when a UN-brokered ceasefire provided safe passage for the PLO leadership to Tunisia. With Lebanon, the genocide accusation became rhetorical warfare, undertaken from an inability to help the PLO materially. The Soviet Union had been embroiled in Afghanistan since 1979, and the caches of PLO weapons imported from Eastern Europe and uncovered by the Israelis, Kalashnikovs, RPGs, ammunition, etc., was an embarrassment. Arab populations, of course, sympathized with the PLO, but Jordan had expelled the PLO from that country in 1970. Egypt had signed a peace agreement with Israel in 1979, and Syrian air forces were chased from Lebanon's Bekaa Valley by Israeli jets 5 days into the war, inducing an Israeli-Syrian ceasefire. Genocide accusations were the best that anyone could do. Anti-Semitic tropes laced these genocide accusations. And again, we're in 1982 here. The Qataris claimed that Israeli troops were motivated by, quote, their thirst for Arab blood, be it the blood of a child, a woman, or an old person, as they were seeking the so-called security of the chosen people, as they so arrogantly state. Israel also allegedly manipulated world opinion. Cuba warned, quote, these are not the times in which the world can be deceived by well-orchestrated press campaigns. The truth is that Israel intends genocide against the Palestinian people. The United Arab Emirates added, there is a Zionist group which dominates the US Capitol and mass media and exercises influence on elections in the United States. One can read page after page of these accusations in 1982. They literally start in June and they continue into the next year. Now, post-Cold War, and I'm trying to get to my next slide. Post-Cold War and during the Intifadas, the PLO continued to charge genocide. Nabil Ramlawi, that is not him. The arrow seems to have moved, but he is to the left of Arafat wearing the tie with the thick glasses. Nabil Ramlawi was the PLO representative with the UN Human Rights Commission in Geneva, and he now accused the Israelis repeatedly of killing children, even unborn children. He claimed that the Israelis poisoned Palestinian schoolgirls in the West Bank to render them barren. He insisted that during the first Intifada, the Israelis had forced 4,000 abortions on Palestinian women. And in 1997, and this became something of a scandal, he accused the Israelis of having injected hundreds of Palestinian children with the HIV virus as part of a genocidal campaign. I have the notice of his death there. He was still in Geneva in 2023, October. He died a couple of weeks after October 7th. No doubt a very happy man. But these early charges that I've been talking about kind of set a pattern. First, they didn't let the facts get in the way of the story. Nobody in those days bothered to line up accusations with the actual UN Genocide Convention of 1948. They also deployed anti-Semitic tropes repeatedly. The Israelis killed innocents with glee, including children and even unborn children, and they fooled world opinion in the process with massive campaigns of deception. The main thing, and keep this in mind when we get to the end, the main thing was simply the charge. Genocide accusations legitimized terror as self-defense, delegitimized Israeli responses to terror, and also delegitimized Israel's existence as racist and colonial. So let's look at the present day ideological perspective. Today's genocide charges against Israel use these earlier inversions of reality and anti-Semitic tropes, but they also lean on settler colonial theory, which expanded in the academic world during the 2000s. According to the theory, settler colonialism is different than mercantile colonialism that seeks raw materials and markets. It is characterized by mass settlement over the long term that invariably exterminates indigenous people. Scholars of settler colonialism believe that only Westerners have committed settler colonialism, and so they study Canada, the US, and Australia. But they have special ire. They have special ire. I'm trying to get to the next slide. They have special ire for Israel. They hold that the Jewish connection to Israel is a Zionist fabrication. They hold that Israel weaponizes the Holocaust, which for settler colonial theorists obscures colonial genocides in order to create legitimacy while committing genocide itself. Finally, they believe that settler colonialism in Israel, unlike in the United States, Canada, or Australia, can be rolled back because millions of Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, and elsewhere are ready to return. These beliefs are ideological. They are not empirical. Those decrying settler colonialism ignore historical developments that conflict with the theory. In Israel's case, the numerous attempts to reach compromise solutions. Settler colonial theorists also reject any thought of a two-state solution because any Israeli state, in their view, would continue to legitimize settler colonialism. They have also redefined genocide so as to sidestep the UN Genocide Convention. Genocide for them is not a defined crime with special criminal intent and certain criminal acts. It is a societal structure that unfolds over time. The Gaza war is thus the final stage of a decades-long genocide that was always in the cards. Arguments concerning Israeli self-defense, the horrors of October 7th, the need to destroy Hamas, The problems of doing so in an urban landscape with an underground enemy, all of these are simply waved aside. Thus, the muddled nature of genocide accusations against Israel since October 2023. It is considered a given that Israel is committing genocide because this is what settler colonial societies allegedly do. But the facts have to be shoehorned into the theory because the UN Genocide Convention is international law. You can't ignore it. The Israelis are the ones who are always accused of ignoring international law, and therefore those charging genocide cannot. This is what they have long accused Israel of doing. Thus, since October 7th, now I'll try and get to the next slide. Thus, since October 7th, we have been told the following in venues ranging from news outlets like Al Jazeera and the Electronic Intifada to human rights NGOs like Amnesty International and Al-Haq. And Al-Haq is, of course, associated with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, an old terrorist organization with quite a pedigree. But we have been told the following, and you've heard it all. Hamas was resisting settler colonialism on October 7th. Tales of Hamas rapes, beheadings, infanticide are Israeli fabrications to justify genocide. Civilian fatalities number in the hundreds of thousands. The Israelis have even attacked fertility clinics in order to kill unborn children. We've been told that the Israelis send Palestinian civilians to humanitarian zones, not to get them out of combat zones, but to kill them there. We've been told that the Israelis have deliberately starved Gaza. We've been told that the Israelis have destroyed hospitals, schools, and apartment buildings, not because they are used by Hamas, not because they are booby-trapped, not because they have tunnels underneath them or tunnel shafts in them, but to create a landscape that cannot support life. And finally, we're told that Israel and its allies are part of a global deception that weaponizes charges of anti-Semitism to conceal all of these horrors. Well, the war in Gaza has been a horror. Wars fought in urban spaces against dug-in enemies who deploy guerrilla tactics and who refuse to surrender generally are. There are numerous guides from Stalingrad in 1943 to Berlin in 1945 to more recently Mosul in 2016-17. We mustn't lose sight of this, but states committing genocide do not warn civilians to get out of harm's way. They do not allow the import of hundreds of thousands of tons of food and other humanitarian aid, and they do not target weapons systems like rocket launchers and underground smuggling routes. And this brings us to the experts. Just before he won New York's mayoral election, Zoran Mamdani defended his genocide accusations against Israel by noting that this was, quote, not my own individual assessment, but a reflection of leading genocide scholars from across the world, unquote. Many others make tactical use of the experts. In May 2025, social media provocateur Mehdi Hassan announced to his 1.7 million followers on X, and I quote, genocide experts are almost all in agreement that what's happening is a genocide, unquote. The experts, Hassan says, help us to avoid, and I quote, being gaslit by apologists for Israel. Now, some of the experts are truly experts, such as William Shabbos, who has written very important books on genocide case law, and with them one can respectfully disagree. Others are simply posing as experts. 10 days after the October 7th attack, between 800 and 900 scholars claiming expertise in, I quote, international law, conflict studies, and genocide studies, unquote, issued a statement concerning the crime of genocide in Gaza. The signatories actually included, and I looked them up, scholars of medieval art, racial capitalism, veterinary medicine, chemical engineering, IT business administration, Chilean street art, forests in India, Kurdish feminism, Irish philosophy, classics linguistics, and performance theory. And so many of the people signing this particular statement were not experts in genocide or international law at all. There are other supposed experts who simply fake the notion of consensus. In August of 2025, the International Association of Genocide Scholars issued a resolution to the effect that, and I quote, Israel's policies and actions meet the legal definition of genocide per the Genocide Convention, and that international courts should act accordingly. This statement made global headlines. It represented itself as having the agreement of the entire academic association studying genocide. But to pass it, the leadership cheated. Fewer than 30% of the members participated in a rushed online poll with no discussion allowed before the vote. Discussion might have been useful because the resolution contained numerous very basic factual errors. The most important person claiming expertise, in my view, is Francesca Albanese, since 2022, the UN Special Rapporteur for the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967. She is the Special Rapporteur for that. Hers is the face of the genocide accusation, and it is also the face of ideology posing as expertise. Albanese's credentials are exaggerated. Though she has never practiced law nor taken the exams that would allow her to practice law, she claims to be a, quote, international lawyer. In fact, she has a master's degree in human rights law from the University of London's School of Oriental and Asiatic Studies, known as SOAS for short. This program at the University of London teaches a third world approach whereby international law exists to protect global inequities. Last year, at a talk at SOAS, Albanese thanked the SOAS faculty for providing her, and I quote, with the foundational knowledge to comprehend the original sin of international law and its use as a tool of colonization and imperialism. Albanese has submitted several reports since October 7th to the UN Human Rights Commission in Geneva. That's who she answers to. And the most important one of these reports, in my view, is Anatomy of a Genocide. She submitted it in rough form in March of 2024 and in final form, as you can see, on 1 July 2024. This report proceeds from settler colonial theory. I quote her, erasing the indigenous Arab presence has been an inevitable part of the forming of Israel as a Jewish state, unquote. October 7th for Albanese was simply a pretext for the final genocidal steps. But again, the facts have to fit the theory. Here, Albanese used a flawed evidentiary basis for fatalities. She employed the colorful one-page impact snapshots from the UN Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA, which in turn relied heavily on fatality statistics, not only from the Gaza Ministry of Health, which you've all heard of, but also from the Gaza Government Office of Information, which is simply a Hamas propaganda office. Thus, Albanese argued in Anatomy that 70% of the fatalities had been women and children, so as to allege a genocidal pattern. Now, this figure of 70% women and children was debunked in May of 2024. Nevertheless, in her final draft of Anatomy in July, she kept this figure, and in fact, she repeats this figure when she speaks at universities and other venues. Anatomy further claims that Israel has deployed deliberate starvation in Gaza, especially among children. I don't know how you single out children in a war zone from starvation, but the larger point here is that Albanese willfully ignored in the report, and still continues to ignore, many developments. The World Food Program is the largest organization in the world fighting global hunger, and they were active in Gaza, and they still are. In February of 2024, the chief executive of the World Food Program, Carl Schell, reported to the UN Security Council that while more trucks crossing into Gaza were desirable, the main problem was the safety of convoys moving from Rafah and Kerem Shalom, these crossings in southern Gaza, to Gaza City in the north, through combat zones and through breakdowns of civil order. Schell would not say so openly, but the Israelis had begun escorting convoys while creating coordinated routes for the World Food Program. These steps helped alleviate emergency conditions by mid-March, just as Albanese was submitting the draft of the report. In May, the Israelis responded to numerous requests by the World Food Program, by the International Court of Justice, and by the United States, and opened 2 truck crossings in northern Gaza where there had not been truck crossings before, and they allowed deliveries from abroad to land at the Ashdod port just north of Gaza. Readers of Albanese's report would not have known that the World Food Program even existed, nor would they have known that between March and July, the parameters of this report in 2024, 23,187 trucks entered Gaza carrying 397,620 tons of food, medical supplies, shelter equipment, and so on. But even according to the Gaza Ministry of Health, 27 children died of malnutrition-related illnesses by 21 March 2024. This is a figure that Albanese didn't include. It's tragic. It does not suggest mass starvation. It does not suggest any plan to implement mass starvation. It does not support her overall assessment. Albanese's press conference after she submitted the anatomy report, this would be on 27 March 2024, revealed her anti-Semitism. Now, of course, this had already been revealed in 2014 when she was railing about the Jewish lobby in the United States and how it controlled the government and all of that sort of thing. Now, in March of 2024, she said that she had received threats from what one reporter called, and I quote, certain people. When asked about the Hamas rapes of Israeli women on 7 October, Albanese said, I quote, I didn't find any convincing evidence. She was meanwhile, quote, disturbed by the weaponization of anything that happened on the 7th of October, unquote. She made the astonishing comment that she found no evidence that, and I quote, the crimes that were committed against Israelis on the 7th of October were propelled by anti-Semitism, unquote. This assertion ignored Hamas's long obsession with the Jews, in addition to phone calls from October 7th in which Hamas killers boasted to parents, no less, about killing Jews with their bare hands. Her university speaking tour in late 2024 and into 25, in essence, made Albanese the legal expert, essentially bypassing the International Court of Justice with which Albanese and others had become very impatient, and we can talk about that later. Again, with the credentials, her hosts at Princeton hailed her as, quote, a leading international lawyer, unquote. Again, with the report, her hosts at Erasmus University Rotterdam said that her reporting was, quote, meticulously grounded in international law and empirical evidence. It was grounded in neither, as I think I've just pointed out. SOAS, the place she graduated from, did not even pretend academic objectivity. They claimed to, and I quote, stand in solidarity with Rapporteur Albanese in the face of attempts to silence her powerful and courageous voice, unquote. She answered, they continued, smears, slurs, and accusations of anti-Semitism with vigor and moral clarity. More interesting, I think, is this. In university and other settings, Albanese receives more than just a warm welcome. The lecture hall at University of Toronto, which you see here bedecked in Palestinian flags, gave her a rapturous standing ovation when she entered the room in November 2024. This is before she even said anything. The acclaim here is unprecedented for a UN official, and I find the joy exhibited for a speaker discussing the solemn topic of genocide simply weird. Perhaps we can understand it if we read some of the tributes, the Valentines, written to Albanese. This one comes from Hamid Dabashi. He is an Iranian literature professor at, this will be a surprise, Columbia University. He published the following tribute to Albanese in Middle East Eye, but it reflects thousands of admiring social media comments. I'll quote him. She is the voice of a global conscience speaking, I'll do it again. She is the voice of the global conscience speaking truth to the vulgar warmongers. Her bold, brilliant, and thoroughly researched report has inspired much admiration around the globe, but also horror and fury among Zionists who do not want Israel's genocide in Palestine to have such an eloquent, precise, and detailed account. She was, Dabashi said, taking on genocidal Zionists, as well as those, and I quote, fooled and deluded by the Israel lobby in the US and by Western media propaganda. In other words, Dabashi grasps the baton of Albanese's earlier anti-Semitic remarks and uses them to bolster Albanese's faux expertise. And in truthful moments, Albanese reveals the strategy, and I'm closing here. She seeks not to defend international law, but to rewrite it and to have the levers seized by like-minded people. She said the following at Erasmus University, and I quote, we cannot blame international law because it's colonial. She continues, international law is a car, and to make it start, we need a key. The key is not in the right hands, so we have to get hold of the key, unquote. But the key, and I'm ending here, the key is the genocide accusation itself and the degree to which it becomes a ubiquitous rallying cry. Israel is a settler colonial state. It is genocidal, period. What about the evidence? I'll quote Albanese again. It doesn't really matter whether a court has finished investigating, or, as she said at Erasmus, never before have I heard so much talking about settler colonialism among students. I'll quote her again. And I'll end with this. Israel cannot run away without a sticker on its back of an apartheid state which has committed genocide, unquote. It is the sticker, which will never come off, that matters. At the same time, Albanese and other false experts have circled back to the genocide accusations leveled by the PLO in the 70s and 80s. Accusers at that time never hoped that Israeli leaders would be found guilty in a court. The International Criminal Court did not even exist. In essence, the PLO foreshadowed Mahmoud Mandami's statement to the effect that the accusation alone was what mattered. And as Francesca Albanese and the gang of fake experts confirm, the real aim of the genocide accusation is to destroy permanently the legitimacy of the Jewish state. Thanks very much, everybody.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Goda.
I'm going to stop sharing as soon as I can figure out how to stop sharing.
Okay. A number of questions. Let's start with understanding how some of the experts that you actually, there's two questions around this. Some of the experts who are legitimate scholars of genocide, what are their arguments? What are their arguments in favor of this idea that Israel is a genocidal state? How do they, people that you actually respect?
Well, William Shabbos has been writing about genocide as a legal matter for many, many years. And he wrote a very important book called Genocide and International Law, which is a guided tour, right, through the case law on genocide. It's indispensable. It's gone through 3 editions, and the third edition just came out this year. He has said that Israeli actions meet the definition of genocide. The odd thing is that when you read the book carefully on the case law, my reading of that and my reading of the case law really doesn't support a genocide charge. And there's something else very interesting about Shabbos, and I hope this isn't getting too deeply into the weeds, but I think it's indicative of things. The UN General Assembly passed a resolution in 1982 saying that a particularly awful massacre carried out by Lebanese Christians in Lebanon was an act of genocide. And of course, these Lebanese Christians were allied with the Israelis in 1982, and the Israelis should have had a tighter leash on them and all of that sort of thing. But the massacre happened anyway, and the UN General Assembly called it a genocide. Shabbos wrote in his first and second editions that this was not a genocide, that this was simply a step to embarrass the Israelis, a bit of Cold War politics and all of that sort of thing. Third edition came out in 2025. Now he says this was a heroic act by the UN General Assembly. Why?
Mm-hmm.
The history hadn't changed. You can go back and read the General Assembly debates, which are just a bunch of anti-Semitic claptrap and no discussion of the substantive elements of genocide or anything like that. And yet he's changed his mind on it. And the only thing I can think of, and I'm I could ask him, I suppose, is the second edition came out in 2005. This is when the wars in Gaza, began in 2008, 2009. Actually, the second edition came out in 2009. I think he just sort of turned on Israel over
Yeah.
Gaza and Hamas and all of that. So, but he's the primary expert who actually knows something.
There are two other scholars that are mentioned here. Omar Bartov and
Yeah,
Amos Goldberg also claim that Israel's committing genocide or similar kinds of
yeah.
accusations.
Bartov is the most important because he's a preeminent Holocaust scholar who wrote a book called The Anatomy of Genocide. Albanese plagiarized the title for her report, which I guess is par for the course. He's a little different. He doesn't buy into settler colonial theory. He's never mentioned it. He argues that this turned into a genocide with the Israeli offensive against Rafah in May of 2024. And his argument is that the civilians were told to leave Rafah and go to the Al Mawasi humanitarian area.
Mhm.
And in his view, there was no place else to go, right? And once you get to the point where there's no place else to go, kind of like with the general government in 1941-42, then a genocide can take place. The problem is several things. One, the offensive against Rafah really focused primarily on the Philadelphia corridor. You can sort of follow this day by day. And the main aim here was to get the Philadelphia corridor because that was where Hamas was importing armaments from the Sinai. And the offensive against Rafah itself and the four Hamas battalions there was actually very incremental. And at some point, Hamas turned to more guerrilla tactics rather than engaging the Israelis. And that's when you get more destruction in buildings in Rafah. Leaving aside the fact that leading up to the Rafah offensive, right, there was a tremendous international effort for a ceasefire, and Hamas kept saying no, right? Anthony Blinken said we'd have a ceasefire if Hamas would just say yes. The Arab states were saying if Hamas would just say yes, we'd have a ceasefire. There were rumors that the Qataris and the Egyptians were going to freeze Hamas bank accounts and arrest their leaders. Hamas denied those rumors, but the Egyptians and the Qataris never did. Also, with the Rafah offensive, the following crossings were open. Kerem Sholem was open, Eretz was open, Western Eretz was open, the ill-fated American Pier was open. Guess which crossing was closed? The Rafah crossing in Egypt, because the Egyptians were bent out of shape that the Israelis had taken the Philadelphia corridor. So nothing adds up to genocide
Mhm.
with regard to the actual playing out of the offensive in Rafah that Omer is talking about.
There are a number of questions about the UN.
Yeah,
It's kind of like a catch-22 here because the UN, it says, how do you explain that the UN said that this is genocide?
yeah.
And there's another question about if, how is it that the UN was the organization that was instrumental in giving Israel legal status as a state and now is instrumental in claiming that Israel is an occupied colonial state? How could the same UN be so diametrically opposed to itself?
Because it's not the same UN. The UN was quite different in the early Cold War years of 1948. Two interesting things happened in 1948. Well, lots of interesting things happened in 1948, but for us, two interesting things happened in 1948. Israel became a state and the Genocide Convention was written. Okay. There were efforts by the Arab states. It's always said, well, the global South wasn't included, in the Genocide Convention. Every Middle Eastern state was actually included in the writing of the Genocide Convention, except for Israel, which had not become a UN member yet. And there were efforts by the Arab states to write the convention in such a way that they could either mistreat their own Jews with impunity, or Israel could be blamed for genocide. But of course, what happens in the 1960s and 70s is a number of things. One is decolonization, which creates a large number of new states who are very sympathetic to anything that looks like decolonization. And of course, they were absolutely right about South African apartheid. And with regard to Israel, there's an argument to be made for them going along with the Arab states because the Arab states backed them on South African apartheid. And of course, oil politics were very important at that time, too. But Robert Wistrich wrote a lot about the UN, and he said, look, the problem is the one country, one vote system at the UN. And, there will always be, and of course, Israel is this imagined colonial power. There will always be this imbalance there. And of course, the Human Rights Commission which sits in Geneva, is infamous for this. It was the Human Rights Commission that created the special rapporteur position for Palestine in 1993 to begin with. And when they hired Albanese, they knew that she didn't have anything close to the credentials of the people who had preceded her in that position, and she didn't hold the credentials that the other people applying for the job had. They knew who she was, they knew what she was going to say, they knew that she would write manifestos instead of, actual reports, and that's what they got with her.
There are a number of questions again of how do we get to this place where the media, everything seems to collude together, the media, the UN,
Yeah.
all of these, how do you think we got to this place? And questions about, well, what can we do? What can we do to rebut these charges of genocide and colonialism and all the other ways that Israel is accused of being delegitimate?
How we got to the place, there's no single answer to that. But I will say that our opponents in this debate had a 50-year head start on us. They started making these arguments in the 1960s. So many of us didn't take them seriously. And in the meantime, they were filtering down. They were moving into the mainstream. Of course, they're aided by Qatar money and that sort of thing. But they're also aided by the university's turn to postmodernism. We think of the university as a place of empiricism. We think of truth as something that exists. We think of knowledge that somebody has to gain it, right? You have to learn it. Knowledge, truth, these things have to be investigated, and knowledge is very hard won. The postmodern view of this is that truth, knowledge, these things are simply manufactured. Knowledge is manufactured, truth is manufactured. There's really no such thing. These things are kind of made, constructed, right, in order to preserve power relations. And those power relations are determined by race, class, and gender in most cases, right? We're living in Michel Foucault's world, whether we want to be or not. And I don't think we had any really clear idea how far this had gone. Because it's English departments. Who gives a shit? I mean, it's English. Who cares what they say? And I don't think we understood how far this had went until the protests and the encampments, when people looked at things with their own eyes and saw a narrative that simply was false, right? And so that process has taken decades. And there are efforts to turn it back, but there's no silver bullet for any of this. I can think of many ideas, but there is no silver bullet.
Yeah. The very disturbing thing is, of course, it's outside the university now. It's in every discipline, whether it's Israeli publishers that can't get published, whether it's the medical profession where you can't get Israeli doctors to get internships, and in the American universities and hospitals where, you've got the media, you've got K through 12 education. It is just ubiquitous everywhere now outside of the academia. Where it starts there, it doesn't end there.
And very much in the press.
Yes.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us in the remaining time some of your ideas about what can we do, and how can we be more on top of this, if possible?
What can we do?
Can we do?
I've been too busy diagnosing or trying to diagnose the problem than to figure out what a solution might be. But my feeling is it's a lot of little things. First of all, we need we need narratives, right, on how these accusations are false. For all of the talk about how the Jews control the press and Hasbara and AIPAC and all of those sorts of things, if the Jews really controlled the press, they have done an exceptionally poor job in the past 2 years. And so, part of it is just trying to regain narrative wherever one can, right? Particularly among people who are just sort of perplexed. Could this be true? Reach those people in the middle who you're never going to get Students for Justice in Palestine to say, "Oh, well, it's not really a genocide, right? I didn't know that," But these people in the middle, I think are certainly reachable. There have been, initiatives in higher education, with regard to the Western tradition and strategic studies and things that universities haven't taught, have neglected for some 30 years. And I think when it's in the elementary schools and these sorts of things, the parents just need to raise hell. I mean, when the Holocaust survivor is disinvited
Mhm.
because the Holocaust survivor is pushing a narrative that legitimizes or normalizes the genocide in Gaza, then the grassroots organizations, to me, simply have to say, we don't let this go. We don't let
Mhm.
this go.
So be an activist in your own community with your own. I was on the phone today with a woman from a food co-op in Brooklyn that they're trying to pass a BDS resolution in the food co-op. And what can she do? How can she, it's very local. Okay, so thank you so much. There's so much here, and there were many, many more questions that we didn't get to, and I'm sure that people can reach you, and it'll be in our in the follow-up email that everyone will get how to reach Dr. Goda, and follow his work. It's really important. So thank you so much for tonight, and
Thanks for having me.
yeah. So our next Scholars Circle features Dr. Andrew Pessin on a two-part, the second part, Protocols of the Elders of Anti-Zion, the Global Conspiracy Against the Jews, on Tuesday, December 16th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We are sharing tonight a special message from Dr. Pessin that he's involved in some very, very exciting new initiatives that Chaim Mitzvah will be part of. Dr. Pessin states a pair of new movements that have been gathering steam are: one, an activist movement called the Movement Against Anti-Zionism, and two, a scholarly movement called the Institute for the Critical Study of Anti-Zionism. Both aim to change the public discourse and reclaim the academy for honest scholarship instead of activist propaganda. The Institute has been established by Dr. Andrew Pessin, who has given several Scholars Circle lectures for us already, and we'll discuss the Institute at his next lecture on December 16th. To learn more about this, please visit movementagainstanti-Zionism.org on X. At X, the Institute for CSA website will be coming soon. Alternatively, you may subscribe to Dr. Pessin's free Substack, andrewpessin.substack.com. Okay, so there's actually some very exciting news coming. We're going to be launching a 6-part class that Dr. Pessin has been putting together. So in answer to Dr. Goda's charge to us, we're going to be learning new narratives and being able to counter with information and education. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you again on December 16th. And thank you again, Dr. Goda.
Thank you.
Good night.
No.